Here to talk about how the talks could go is the activist who designed Magnitsky sanctions and is himself wanted by Russian President Vladimir Putin, Bill Browder. Hi, Mr. Browder. Great to have you back on the show. Thanks for making the time.
Great to be here.
I remember interviewing you maybe even 2 years ago where you were a proponent, an active proponent of the idea of not only freezing Russian assets, but transferring them to Ukraine. 2 years later, the subject is almost just being broached. And really what's up for debate or discussion, or what seems to be agreed to, at least you could say, is the prospect of the profits from those assets being transferred from Ukraine. Does that go far enough from where you sit?
In my opinion, definitely not. So just to put some numbers out there, there's $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves that are frozen in the West. And Ukraine is desperately in need of resources to fight this war. And we're also in a situation where a lot of Western governments are starting to balk at continuing to fund Ukraine in the same way we've been doing it in the past. We've seen this in the United States that delayed $61 billion for 6 months. We saw this in the European Union, where Hungary blocked 50 billion euros for a period of time. And so the money is desperately needed. There's less money coming from the West. And so to take 3 billion euros or even to take the future profits from this money and put it all together and say we're going to give them 50 billion euros right now is just not enough. And this reminds me a lot of the talk when we said Ukraine needs tanks, and everyone said, well, maybe not.
Yeah.
And then eventually everyone understood they really need tanks, and so we gave them tanks. And then the same thing with long-range missiles and so on.
What do you think the impact is of that, though? The fact that every time Ukraine really needs something, the imperative is there. There has to be almost like an evolution of positions among the West to get to the point where finally now it seems like, oh, tanks is a no-brainer. Maybe at one point this will seem like a no-brainer, but the negotiations have been, fraught in some cases, particularly where Europe is concerned.
Well, the consequences are a lot of dead Ukrainians, and as the war goes on, it creates splinters among the allies, among the consensus. And what Putin is hoping is that we all somehow, just give up. And it's very hard to hold a big coalition like this together to carry on with this war that Ukraine can't afford by itself. And Putin is hoping that he's got the staying power and we don't. And he's probably right in the sense that, America has got an election coming up in November. Donald Trump is likely to be the next president of the United States based on poll results today. And he said he's going to cut off Ukraine. And that means that literally half the money going to Ukraine is not going to be coming in the future. And so it really is sort of hugely important that we stop sort of tiptoeing around the interest on this money and just go for the whole amount. And we can send it into Ukraine at different times, but the money should be taken away from Russia right now while the political will is there to do so.
The federal government here in this country, and I know you've had many interactions with them, and in particular, then Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland, now Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, they have talked at length about how they are advocating for what you're describing, that they have been working the sort of room, the metaphoric room behind the scenes in order to see something happen. At the same time, as we've been discussing, what seems to be agreed to is far short of what the key objective would be, at least from Ukraine's perspective, and the way Canada has talked about it behind the scenes too. Can Canada play a role in trying to convince our allies, or are we sort of limited by the size and the relative weight of our country?
Canada has been a major part of the solution here, not part of the problem. Canada was the first country to be talking about this, followed by the United States, followed by Great Britain. The problem is that the European Union is sort of stuck. There's 27 member states of the European Union, and the policy that they come up with is not a sort of single policy. It's a policy of compromise and agreement and watering down. And in particular, the European Union consists of certain members that are pro-Putin, like Viktor Orban of Hungary and a few others. And so I think it really helps a lot to have someone like Chrystia Freeland there to push this hard and to push this forward. It helps to do that with a combined voice with Foreign Secretary of Britain, David Cameron, and Janet Yellen from the United States. In the end, though, we're facing this very dysfunctional European Union where most of the money sits. More than 200 billion sits in the European Union, and specifically it sits at Euroclear in Belgium. And so you really need to have a decision by the European Union to unlock all this money. And the other thing I would say is that a decision can't be taken by one country without being taken by all countries, because there's a risk if one country confiscates the money, let's say the United States does, then people will say, well, the US dollar is a riskier currency than the euro. And so Europe needs to do it together with the US and the UK, et cetera. And so it really comes down to the lowest common denominator, and everyone who can push should push, and I'm sure they will be pushing.
Mr. Browder, I'll leave it on that note. Appreciate your analysis this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.